So thank you so much also today for joining me for this last session. And today we'll be talking about what in Pakistani parlance is called the framework. So what is the framework of your research? And this term always kind of perplexes me because for all the years that I taught and studied in United States, we never talked about a framework. Okay? Now, I know in social sciences, people do articulate a framework for their research and then write their dissertations and books according to that framework. But in literary studies, at least, we don't write like that. We don't train our students to write like that. So I've noticed that the dissertations that I used to review from Pakistan are structured like social sciences dissertations. So they will have an abstract, but then they will have a portion where they explain their delineations, their hypotheses, their research questions, and then they'll have a literature review. And then they will go into the discussion of whatever they wanted to do. Now, here we absolutely do not follow that style. Our students, after they have defended a prospectus, they just write a very extensive introduction. And the introduction introduces what are they proposing to do in the dissertation, how will they employ theory and why, and then what are they going to do in the dissertation. That's roughly how our dissertations are structured in United States. So what I can gather from the term framework then is the methodology that you're going to use. How would you read certain texts in literature especially, and what would you do with them? That to me constitutes a framework, which usually is a theoretical framework. And this is connected to what we talked the other day about reading and its intimate connection to your scholarly and academic work. So technically, if you're getting a PhD or an MPhil, by the time you get to your dissertation, the framework would have already followed you there. Now, here's why I'm suggesting this. Let's say my students who specialize in postcolonial studies and its various manifestations, before they get to their dissertation, they take their comprehensive exams, or they used to take their comprehensive exams. I mean, I only have one student left. And in their comprehensive exams, they traditionally read from 280 to 300 books. We used to give them a year or a year and a half just to read. So that means by the time they get to thinking about their dissertation, they have read in their field widely, right? They know its debates, they know its major theorists and major authors. And then when they move into their dissertation, they are now going in depth, right? But they are bringing that knowledge with them, that understanding with them. So within that, then their framework very easily could be, I'm going to use Said's assertions in culture and imperialism, and I will go and read these novels of these collections of short stories from the point of view of the Arab people, from the point of view of Palestinians, from the point of view of people in Bangladesh, from the point of view of people in South India. These are some of the themes that my students have employed and used. Or the more recent dissertations that I directed, one was about the genealogy and development of feminism in Pakistan and how not to just rely on Western thought processes for that. So, of course, that student read Chandra Mohanty. So that is my understanding of a framework within the context of my own experience. And how to develop it, it doesn't matter how you organize your dissertation. You cannot just first pick the primary text and then say, okay, let me go find a framework, right? A framework or a method of looking and analyzing text is a tool, right? What's important is, if you're writing a dissertation, what is important isn't what is cool and what is trendy. I get those questions too. What is cool to write about these days? I have no idea. I mean, what's most important is what is important to you. What is it that motivates you? What is it that you actually want to write about, right? That will drive how you will approach your framework or your writing. Now, part of it cannot just be, I like these 3 novels and I want to write about them, right? That's a surface level engagement. Part of it has to be, what is it that you want to accomplish with your work? What do you want to say and why? And it has to be something that you're deeply interested in, because you're going to write about 200, 250 pages of a theory-informed work. It better be something that interests you, that you see yourself working in after you have finished your degree. It is something that you will constantly be developing in as a scholar, right? So choose something that sustains you, but that's also important to you and that excites you. Then you go to which primary text I'm going to use, who am I going to read, and why, right? And at that stage, you will figure out, okay, this is what I want to do. It's probably about women's rights, so maybe I need to read up on my feminist theory, right? Because I will need an understanding of women's rights, right? And then that becomes your framework. Or I want to write about Pakistan. How did it come to be? Why did the Muslims of India think of themselves as different? Was it always so? Or was it politically motivated? Right? So that was my project, my dissertation project. My dissertation project was simply the normative knowledge about creation of Pakistan, depending on who you read. And if you don't read just the romanticized historiography, the hagiography, most scholars believe that the Pakistani nationalism was a reactionary movement and came too late to the stage of Indian politics, right? 1940s or something. And this is British scholars as well as Indian scholars. So what I was interested in was trying to trace, when is it that the Muslims of India, by and large, at least the elite, start seeing themselves as a separate constituency, as different from their Hindu counterparts. And for that, the term that I used was the rise of Muslim exceptionalism. And then that became my project. And that led me to studying and reading on theories of nationalism, right? Because I needed to understand what people have written about nationalism, how does it emerge, right? A clear understanding of theories of nationalism, applying those to the discussions of Indian nationalism and within that rise of the Pakistan movement, and then looking at primary texts by Muslim writers post 1857 all the way to 1940s, and seeing how do they invoke their religious cultural identity as Muslims in opposition to their Hindu counterparts, right? And how does that become a marker around which is built this idea that we need a separate country, we need to have an autonomous region which is for Muslims of India only. So overall, the purpose was to suggest that Muslim political consciousness actually was far ahead of their Hindu counterparts if we account for the rise of Muslim exceptionalism and not just national politics. Whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, that's besides the point. And then in the process of discussing that, I also had to learn, how are differences mobilized towards the politics, right? What are objective differences? How are they subjectivized? Because we all live with differences, right? And tolerate each other. But it's a certain kind of politics that teases out those differences and mobilizes them and subjectivizes them. And it's that eventually unleashes different kinds of worldviews and different kinds of politics. So how did I come up with my framework, right? I had a rough idea of what is it I wanted to explore, right? That was based in my readings and more importantly, based in what excited me, right? In order to fulfill that dream or that mission, I realized I need to know what are the major texts of Muslim writers post 1857. How many of those can I use? Will I use them chronologically, right? Then that was the primary text part. And then, as I mentioned, in order to argue, I will need to understand how nationalism works, right? How the power during the British time was distributed post 1857. What was the hegemonic order? What was the place of Muslims in it? So I had to understand that. So slowly, the framework developed itself, right? Reading texts on nationalism gave me an idea of, oh, here are some of the theories of nationalism. Here is someone that people have written about rise of Muslim nationalism in India, right? Do I agree with them? Do I not agree with them? And then, if you have ever had a chance to read my book, my first book, Constructing Pakistan, you will see these are eclectic texts. But all of these are pointing to the rise of an exceptional Muslim idea of being in British India. So the first book that I discussed there was W. Hunter's The Indian Muslimans, right? That's his view of how he sees the Muslims as a British administrator, which view is still mobilized, right? And then connected to that was someone writing in Urdu, right? The group that W. Hunter is talking about in the North, a sympathizer of that group, right? His work, Kala Pani, which was in Urdu, right? And these were people who were arrested for inciting revolutionary ideas against the British government and sent to Kala Pani, the Andaman Islands. And that was his account. Then 1858, Ghalib's Dastanbu, which is a Persian text, right? His account of the rebellion itself, right? As someone who's a Muslim, right? And a lot of people don't really understand what happens after the rebellion is put down. I mean, for 2 years, I think, the Muslim citizens of New Delhi were actually ousted from the city. Most of them had to go and live in hutments outside the city, right? Because the British, even though the uprising was multiracial and multi-religious, the Muslims were primarily blamed more for it. And that's where the idea of Muslim exceptionalism emerges, because the Muslim elite they literally feel like their ways are going to end unless they rewrite themselves into the British hegemonic order. So if you read Sayyid Ahmad Khan's Asbab-e-Bagawat-e-Hind, that text is a rewriting of the Muslim elite within the British system, right? It comes across as this subservient apologetics, right? But that is what the Muslims are doing. They are rewriting themselves within the British hegemonic order. Okay. So all of this was led by my rough idea of doing something about tracing the origins of Muslim nationalism, right? The framework was dictated by what I wanted to do or what I wanted to explore. So that also means that the framework is fluid. In the process of your exploration, if you encounter a different set of thoughts and your current framework or way of thinking is not helping you understand that, then you'll have to go look for something else that enables you to do that. Now, the problem in articulating a rigid framework in the beginning is that then instead of exploring your thoughts wherever they take you within the context of your topic, you are restraining yourself because you basically tell yourself, oh, this is not covered in my framework, so I cannot do that. So it will have to be fluid, driven by what is it that you're interested in doing. And then a framework is nothing but a way of doing what you're hoping to accomplish. I mean, if I could use another example from my own experience, so my forthcoming book, Democratic Criticism, which will be available open access online. The question that I was trying to answer there was a disciplinary question in English departments here, is as to what would it take for an average English professor to teach a text that mobilizes tropes and representations from the Muslim world. Can it just be taught with the tools that we teach our students in the Western Academy, right? And my answer to that was, of course, no, right? And so then that became my quest to challenge the Western Academy to think differently about how to teach texts, like when people write about Muslims and Islam. Because if you just reduce them from the tools that are available to our students, then you will not be able to empathize with people who might feel hurt, who might feel saddened by the representation. And in order to understand that, new modes of teaching and thinking need to be developed. So that was the project of the book. In order to do that, since I'm talking about reception, how texts are received, I had to go and then learn what is reception, how does it work, right? I had to articulate what kind of an ideal reader we need to create in our classroom. So then I had to go and read about how is a reader's self constructed, right? What would be a Muslim reader, right? Now, these were the theoretical framings that I had to master before I attempted to do what I was doing. And then the question of primary texts, right? Which novels will I talk about? How will I talk about them, right? Which language will they be in? But all of them, the mechanism or the framework is held together still by what you want to do, right? If you're not clear about what you want to do, a framework is not going to lead you to what you want to do, right? It should be the other way around. So these are some of my ideas about how to develop a theoretical way of looking at texts and writing about them. And I highly recommend that, try to encourage yourself to follow a process like this, not replicate what I just said, but a process which is guided by what you want to do. And then how is where your framework will come in. Now, it goes without saying that this is deeply connected to how you have prepared yourselves as a scholar. If by the time you get to your dissertation, if you've been prepared well and taught well, you will have a basic grounding in your field of study. You would have read, or at least be aware of, different ways of writing and talking about texts. And you take that and further deepen that to get to, your framing or your framework or your mode of studying a language or a literary text or a cultural text. So these are some of my thoughts about it. I know they are not, very well articulated, but as I said in the beginning, personally, I have never dealt with this idea of developing a framework and then articulating it. We don't teach like that in the English departments. I don't know how the linguistics people do it. But, that is my rough understanding of the practice of how to conceive, write, and theorize about a given topic of interest for your dissertations, for your MPhil thesis, and for your books. So that's it. I would love to answer any questions that you have. This world in which we live, it breeds mediocrity, and it tells us to compromise. And we invent reasons, 1,000 reasons to, restrain ourselves. And some of them are really valid reasons. I mean, I could have absolutely refused to do what I'm doing right now, and I would have valid reasons for it. I mean, think of it. I now work in an office from 12 noon till 9 o'clock. I come home, by the time I get home, it's 10 o'clock. So that means even if I just relax a little bit, I go to bed by about 11. To do this, I have to wake up at 5 o'clock, right? Which is not the best time. So that means I've only have had about 4 hours of sleep. So it's built in for me to say, no, I cannot do that. The world is like that. You look around and you say, oh my God, my boss is terrible. My job is so demanding. So life forces mediocrity on it. It forces us to choose safe solutions, comfortable solutions. You live in Pakistan. I have seen that country from my youth, from my childhood, to deteriorate culturally. And this is a fact. Pakistan of today is more precarious and more intolerant than what it was when I was growing up in it. You have to go and find the reasons for it. Yes, maybe we owe a lot of money to IMF. There are imperial forces at work. But what is it that we are doing differently that we have not done? I mean, there are people from Balochistan here. There are people from Sindh here. There are people from KPK, Punjab, Azad Kashmir. In 70 years, we have not been able to abolish the zamindari system. There are people in 21st century in our country who are still enslaved to people, who are indentured labor, right? Have no will of their own. So we cannot afford to just say, I'm just going to teach my classes and buy my little bungalow and have an expensive car, and that's no. As scholars, our job is to produce knowledges and produce and to write and publish, not for ourselves, so that we can change the ways of thinking in the world where you live. Because if you're not going to do it, the politicians are not going to do it. The generals are not going to do it. They are always for the status quo. They want power. You know, it suits them if they keep us divided and keep us hating each other. You know, at the end of the day, like how socialist is People's Party, even though it is still my political party. You know, if the leaders of it are the biggest zamindars in Sindh, and if Bilawal Zardari is a socialist leader, do you think he should have Haris working on his land, right? Same with Imran Khan. I mean, you know, you can't live a lifestyle like that and then be a people's person, right? So what I am always requesting you to do is to develop that. There is not much coming out of Pakistan in literary and cultural scholarship. There are very few people we can name, right? And that doesn't say Pakistan doesn't have the capacity to do it. What it's saying is that maybe you, the professors of literature and linguistics, need to start thinking about it. Need to start, the way like Coker mentioned the other day, that he wants to learn this post-colonial theory and then he wants to work on Sindhi culture and Sindhi literature. We need more of that, you know, but more of that not just for local audiences, something that we can proudly share with the world. Here is our work, you know, try to change our own society and modes of thinking, but also in the international forum where thought moves freely, to have a say in it, right? And that is what I hope and I encourage you to do. For people like us, me, we're done. You know, what else can I do in this life? And, you know, to be very honest, in terms of careers and all, the powers that be finally defeated me. You know, they were able to oust me. Not oust, I mean, I left on my own, but they were able to bring me to a point where I gave up, in material terms, a career that I had built so painstakingly. But more importantly, that I gave up something that I loved doing, right? Interacting with my students, sitting and writing. That's how ruthless this world is. It doesn't matter how good you are, how kind and generous. Those forces will always be there, you know, to destroy you or to stop you. The question is, can we come together, right, and develop a way of thinking the world differently? And it is your job, your mission as intellectuals in Pakistan, as scholars and professors, to take that mission, to do the work of culture, you know, to develop that. So there are things you may not like about your professors, about your heads of the departments. Take a note of that so that when you are in a position of power, you don't repeat them, right? And that is how you will change things. But that's what I keep encouraging all of you to do, anyone that I come in contact with in Pakistan, is that we need your work. We need you to be inspiring, to be inspirational, but more importantly, to be transformative. And you cannot do that by just relying on the same set of slides for your entire career. You cannot do that by just giving top-down education. You have to become living, breathing scholars who are generous, who are constantly seeking new knowledges and then passing them on to, who care about their students and about their communities. You know, that's the message I would like to leave you with. Personally, uh, I have reached a point in my life where I think I'm done. You know, and yes, we all have to go on living and live our lives, but it would be okay if I wasn't here tomorrow, right? Uh, I'm not saying I've finished and I believe I've done much. No, but there comes a moment in your life when you realize, okay, I've done enough. I can just relax a little now. So it's your turn, and I hope and pray that you will take it on, this mission, small as it is, or whatever you choose, something that does something for the young people in your country and that makes them into tolerant, accepting, and generous human beings.